Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the London Borough of Newham Regeneration, Housing and Environment Scrutiny Commission. My name is Councillor Joshua Garfield. I'm Councillor for Stratford and Newtown and the newly elected chair of this Scrutiny Commission. This evening, in among the formal business of the meeting, this commission meets to determine recommendations for one substantive policy item, the future of Newham City Farm. Can everyone just quickly indicate with their hands if they can hear me okay, both on screen and in person? Wonderful. Our discussion on the matter will be taken in two items to allow for dialogue of exempt appendices. Members, please remember to save questions concerning exempt appendices for item 7. While COVID-19 remains a threat to our health, we have and will continue to make allowances for the remote participation of members within the confines of legislation on attendance at council meetings. Members unable to join us physically at Dockside are able to join via video conferencing. However, you are not permitted to vote if you are joining us via Zoom, I'm afraid, but your attendance will not be officially recorded, though your virtual presence will be noted in the minutes, and I very much welcome the fact that you're here at the meeting. I would like to welcome the members of the public and press who are here with us all watching on YouTube. With regards to meeting etiquette, members, please can I ask that you indicate you wish to speak by raising your physical hand or by using the raise hand function on Zoom. I will endeavour to spot every hand, whether in this room or on the screen, but I will rely on the help of officers should I inadvertently fail to spot a member wishing to make a contribution. Please can everyone physically present continue to wear their face mask until they're invited to speak, and remember to replace it once you have finished. Please also can everyone be mindful of social distancing requirements during and after the meeting, and also to scan the location QR codes to track and trace. For this meeting, we will be aided by our inimitable colleagues, Richard Plummer and Roger Raymond. This meeting of the London Borough of Newham Regeneration, Housing and Environment Scrutiny Commission is now called to order. The first item is apologies for absence. Do any members or officers have any apologies to register?
Yes, so we've received apologies from Councillor Osai, and we've received technical apologies from Councillor Gilmerson and who else is? Oh yeah, and of course Councillor Nazir, apologies for that. But they're joining us via Zoom.
Fantastic. Anybody else? No. Great. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any members wishing to make a declaration of interest? Councillor McQuarrie.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to declare that I have spoken to a member of staff about 2 years ago. I have got no recollection of their details at all. He only wanted advice because I'm a trade union's branch secretary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McQuarrie. We've recorded that declaration and noted that you do not have to recuse yourself from the committee as per guidance that you saw previously. Item 3 is the minutes. This is to confirm that the minutes of the meeting held on 29th of April 2021 are a true and accurate record of proceedings. As I wasn't present at that meeting, as I wasn't yet chair, I shan't be voting on the item by convention and ask that all members who were present on the 29th of April agree the accuracy of the minutes by way of show of hands. Wilson. Fantastic, that is agreed. Thank you. Okay, we now move to item 4 on the agenda, which is Newham City Farm. The purpose of this item is to review the proposals for the future of Newham City Farm, understand the financial implications, and review the impact of proposals on the local area and to the well-being of the local community. Please note that there is one exempt appendix relating to this item. This appendix is excluded from public discussion as described in Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act of 1972. This is a result of the appendix containing information relating to action taken in the prevention, investigation or prosecution of crime. If members have questions relating to the appendix, please would you refer them to item 7 of the meeting, which will be held in closed session. Right, there are some esteemed witnesses that I would like to welcome to this meeting. One by one, Councillor Asa, Bo and Louise, would you please introduce yourselves to the committee and to members of the public watching?
Yes, Chair, I'm Councillor James Asser. I am the Cabinet Member for Environment, Highways and Sustainable Transport, and the farm falls within my portfolio as the lead on green spaces.
My name is Bo Stanford Francis. I'm the Director of Public Realm. Newham City Farm falls within the Public Realm Directorate.
I'm Louise Wilcox. I'm Head of Parks and Green Assets, and I manage Newham City Farm currently.
Lovely. Welcome to the three of you, and thank you for joining us this evening. Are there any additional executive members and officers present who would like to introduce themselves at all? Hi, Sheila.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me. I'm having a little audio problems. Can you hear me okay? Thank you.
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sheila Roberts. I'm Assistant Director for Licensing and Regulatory Services, and the Animal Welfare Service falls within my remit. And Tina Delaney is also present, and she'll introduce herself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tina Delaney. I'm the Animal Welfare Manager for London Bath Newham.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Tina. Thank you for being here with us this evening. We will now make way for lead members and officers to make some brief introductory remarks, following which the Commission will proceed with questions. Councillor Assad, will 5 minutes suffice, or do you need longer?
5 minutes will be fine. I was going to keep it relatively brief because I was assuming people would rather move on to questions but they wish to discuss, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. Please proceed.
Yes, so firstly, I'd like to thank the committee for finding time to go through this with us. I appreciate we've sent you quite a lot of details, which I know you spent time reading, and also you've invested some of your own time in terms of looking at the facilities already ahead of the meeting, which has been extremely useful. So firstly, very much appreciate the effort and time people are putting into this. I think the paper obviously comes in two parts, but I think it outlines the kind of situation clearly. This isn't an easy decision to make, and it isn't an easy process to go through, but it is a necessary one. To give some background to the committee of where we reached, the farm is obviously quite old and has been run in several different ways for different organisations over time, but has been back with the council directly for a number of years. Once it came into my portfolio, I'd had a look at the facilities and decided we obviously needed to take some action in terms of the general quality of the facility that was being offered. We also then had to look at the funding situation, which obviously is part of the paper you have got. As part of our early discussion, and this was pre-pandemic, we looked at options in terms of how we might bring extra investment or new investment into the farm to manage it on a longer term and more sustainable basis. And that was part of the original 3-year budget cycle the council passed about 18 months ago. And that was to look at bringing in external opportunities that would raise funds and provide longer term income. We then moved into the pandemic situation, unforeseen by everyone, but obviously that changed the situation in a whole number of ways. The farm obviously had to close as part of the lockdown restrictions, and we took that opportunity to have a look at actually what might be needed in terms of long-term management, long-term investment. I think it's fair to say that initial view was that there was clearly some issues around public safety and access that we would need to address. But as we went into deeper investigation, they clearly raised a whole number of other issues, which I know are outlined in part 4 on your paper, just in terms of the standards of care and things around the quality of the facilities there that we needed to invest in. What has become clear is the original budget that was allocated to the farm even before the early decision was made was not adequate and would have needed to be increased anyway. And additionally, there was a large scale level of investment that would need to go in. I think it's fair to say we've reached a point where, under new regulations, and officers will be able to give you more details on this in regards new animal welfare regulations that came in 2018, a significant amount of work needs to be done to make sure that the farm was brought up to standards. As you see in the paper, there are a number of options laid out of what could be done, from doing nothing to a number of changes. It is clear that the farm cannot continue to operate in the way that it has or on the standards it has. I think there are a number of issues around that we would have to look at, but clearly one of the things is that we have to make sure we maintain the highest standards of animal welfare, but also providing any facility has to be accessible to the public in a way that it isn't at the moment. There is an opportunity coming out of this now, and I will end just so you can move on to questions on the element of the opportunity, because the farm sits in a very large area of green space in Newham. It kind of occupies a corner, for those people who don't know it very well, of King George V Park, and has taken over some of that park already for grazing land, but it is also bordered by Beckton District Park North. There is Beckton District Park South nearby, and New Beckton Park, and we are looking at all of that green space and how we can repurpose it, because to be honest, the whole area is in need of some TLC and some investment. It's used as sport pitches, but it is very well used by the public, but it needs some work done on it. And we would incorporate, as part of our decision, the farm within what we're calling the Beckton Parks Master Plan. We're going to incorporate all of that to invest in that green space area and look at what options we could provide. So there are some opportunities coming out of this, and it strictly speaking sits within the Custom House Board, but certainly the Beckton and Royal Docks Community Assembly has been taking place. There is a lot of interest from residents, and a lot of the projects have been brought forward around investing in parks and green spaces. So we think there is an interest in that, but clearly a decision has to be taken as to how the farm would sit within that. And I think what was very clear from what we have found is that at the moment, both the running of it and the financial situation mean that we're going to have to make a change to that. That's going to be a difficult decision. And that's why I appreciate the opportunity for Scrutiny to have a look at that and bring forward some recommendations that will assist us with that. But I will end at that point so you can move on to any questions, unless officers wish to add anything that I've missed they think is important for the committee to hear before your questions.
Thank you, Councillor Asser. Louise, Bo, Sheila, Tina, is there anything you wish to add before we move on to questions?
Not particularly, Chair. I did, on a couple of slides, just summarise the report, if that's helpful, or we can go straight on to questions, whatever's your preference, Chair.
What does the committee prefer? Would they like to see a presentation first or questions first? Happy to go by consensus.
Presentation.
Just a couple of slides.
Yeah. Let's take a look at your presentation, Bo, really quickly, under 5 minutes, and then we'll move to questions. And if you have to refer back to it, that's no problem at all later on in the session.
Okay, if you can see that whistle stop tour, Councillor Asser has gone through the kind of overview. 1977, broadly the farm is pretty similar to it was then. Some minor additions, but broadly the same facility. Number of small animals and farm animals, 92. It was with Community Links in 2009 on a long-term basis. Then with Active Newham, which ended in 2017. So the site is currently closed and remains closed. Okay, so in terms of the budget, so the saving required is around £332,000. The farm budget was that. Actually, it transpires that in order to maintain the kind of site and the animals in the required condition, it'll be in the region of £440,000. The outturn last year at 420 reflects that. The farm budget is currently zero, so we believe there's a £440,000 pressure. I can come back to this if members want to go through it, but I know I've only got 5 minutes. This is all within your pack already. Broad options appraisal, and you've seen those before. Reopen as is not recommended. Seek capital investment through open farm. We remain with a revenue matter to resolve, and capital would need to be found over a period of time. Explore alternate delivery models. This has been explored on 2 occasions. And we still have a revenue issue, not recommended, and repurpose the site for integration into the Beckton Park Master Plan. I think it's really important to just see the size of the opportunity. So I'll skip this one over, but you can see it's a significant site of strategic importance to the borough. Lots of opportunities there around wellbeing, health, sports, active travel and climate action. So it's a big opportunity area. And something that we obviously consider as a strategic asset for the site. I won't go into the detail because I've only got a couple of minutes, but that's just an overview, so I hope that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, that was most helpful, Bo. Thank you for going at the speed of light. It was good to get an overview of some of the options available and some background to the farm. Louise and Sheila and Tina, is there anything you'd like to add before we move to questions?
No, thank you,
Not for
Chair.
myself.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I didn't hear from Tina, but I imagine it's a
No,
fun.
thank you. No, sorry, I think I spoke at the same time.
That's all right, no problem. Thank you very much, all three of you. All right, I'm going to open the floor to questions from members of the Commission at this time. I'll tell you what, I'll take a couple of questions at once if possible, if not, no worries. I can see Councillor Hanif Abdul Hamid. Would you like to go first, Councillor Abdul Hamid?
Thank you, Chair.
Pardon me, Councillor, you will have to speak incredibly loud in this room to be heard.
Sorry. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me, guys, in your lovely homes? Yes, very good. But I have a quick question. Please forgive me if I've missed this in some of the paperwork, but it's regarding, the aspiration to generate external income to run the farm. I'd like, is it possible for someone to share whether basically any efforts were made to reach out to some of the hugely successful businesses? Because as you know, the farm is located within the arc of opportunity, and there are so many businesses in the area, namely the Asian Business Park, which is developing and doing some fantastic work, City Airport, Taton Live, and of course, what I'm also keen on finding out is whether any engagement was done with the very successful hotel chains in the area, including Excel, as well as Excel, because being a farm in a city area such as this, I'm sure the hotels, I mean, there could be a conversation about hotels coming in, investing in the attraction and offering that as an attraction to their visitors. So is there anything you guys can share, James, or the officers, whether any efforts were made before the pandemic and whether there's still any hope or scope to maybe do that kind of work in the near future to save the farm? Thank you.
Did you want me to take that now, or are you taking questions in groups, Chair?
I think it would be helpful to take that now, given the scope of the question. I think it's a good question from Councillor Abdul Hamid. If we could also get some background as to why securing external funding was fruitless, given the period in which it happened, that would also be very useful.
Yes, so I mean the decision taken is very much along the lines of what Councillor Abdul has suggested. There was an idea that we could bring in external funding and external sponsorship. Some work had begun on that, because obviously we passed the budget in early 2020, and some work had begun on that, and we were having some useful discussions. I'm not in a position to kind of go into the details of those simply because of potential commercial confidentialities I don't necessarily know about, but also talking with the Royal Docks Enterprise Zone, because this sits on the edge of the zone. What basically caused problems with that or brought that to an end was the lockdown, because all the potential opportunities have obviously been hit over the last 18 months by lockdown. Everybody has been hit by the financial difficulties. I mean, hotels were mentioned. We've known what's happened with the kind of tourist industry and the leisure industry, but also other places like the farm, where visitor attractions have been heavily hit, as have a lot of the businesses in the area, where things like the Excel have had no business. The airport has effectively been shut. So without going into details of individual ones, basically the last year and a half in the economic situation has put paid to a plan that was perfectly feasible before that situation. And I mean, with hindsight, you might do something differently, but obviously nobody could have foreseen the last 18 months or the horrors that inflicted upon us. I would add a caveat to that. I think, given that we were working on a budget that had been sat in place for some time, the investigations have revealed that clearly the budgets we're working on that we'd inherited in terms of the kind of situation of the farm were clearly inadequate. So we've discovered other problems that would have needed to be invested in, which would have, I think, made some difficulties with or without the pandemic. But certainly the pandemic has hit many of the opportunities, or if not all of the opportunities, where we would have normally perhaps gone to find investment. So I think the scope of the question is entirely plausible, but it's the last 18 months that's made that exceptionally difficult.
Thank you, Councillor Asser. Councillor Abdul Hamid, has that answered your question sufficiently?
It has. May I ask just a very quick supplementary?
Before I come to your supplementary, may I bring in Councillor Shah and then come back to you? Is that okay? Thank you. Councillor Shah.
screen has gone off, so I just have to log on again because I've written some stuff. So if you can take him and then I can come back.
That's absolutely fine, not to worry. Councillor Abdul, you may go, and then I'll come to you, Councillor McQuarrie.
Thank you, James, for that answer. Yes, of course, I appreciate the fact that especially the businesses that I just mentioned have been really hit hard by the lockdown and the pandemic. But I suppose the last part of my question was in terms of going back to those conversations. I am hoping and really hopeful as soon as the economy opens up and all the developments start again and the airport opens up, hopefully things will change. So is there any plan in the immediate future, in the short, medium term, to go back to those conversations and engage those businesses again?
I think the problem we have with that is in terms of the short-term and medium-term budget pressures in terms of what needs to be done and how we manage this. I mean, I know from speaking to several of the businesses on other issues, they basically have said we no longer have any money for investment in some of this stuff because there's some other projects where we were hoping for perhaps some investment where we're having to pick up some of the scope of that. So just through that and looking at what's happened in terms of layoffs and business models in the short to medium term, I think that's probably entirely unlikely. I think the other problem is we're still not out at the end of the COVID pandemic. We've seen today the kind of massive rise in the number of cases and the amount of people being pinged and going off in terms of self-isolating thing. And I think realistically what we saw, I think Professor Whitty said yesterday that we didn't expect to see a return to normality until at least next spring. So I think, whilst that may be overly cautious, I think given where we are, I think we're unlikely to be back in any kind of normality this side of summer next year, and given the pressures that we have internally in the council, that's going to prove very difficult. If that were an option, I would certainly grab it, but I think it's going to be exceptionally difficult.
Thank you very much, Councillor Asser. Councillor Shah, I'll take your question and Councillor McQuarrie's at once, and then we'll go into the witnesses, please.
Has there been an impact assessment being done? And if not, is there one likely to be done before the Cabinet makes a decision?
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go on. I'll ask the second part to which I'll come back to.
Okay. You may ask both parts at once.
Right, okay. And in the presentation, it mentioned that the farm will be incorporated into the wider Beckton Park master plan. If so, what are the plans going to be for the farm? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shah. So a question on an equality impact assessment and then how it will be incorporated into the master plan. And Councillor McQuarrie, your question, please.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is, what was the state of the city, New City Farm pre-pandemic? Was the site serviceable for visitors? And what was visitors' feedback, for example, on Google reviews?
Thank you, Councillor McQuarrie. So if we could start with the equality impact assessment and then we'll move on to master plan and visitors' feedback, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Singh-Verji.
If I can pass to an officer on the quality impact, I think you can answer this.
So I'm just trying to put my hand down and unmute at the same time, so lower hand. Yeah, I think that's a really important question, actually, and thank you for raising it. So we're presenting 4 options today. We have a recommended option, but we didn't want to prejudge today. We obviously have kind of done an outline EQIA equality impact assessment for our recommended option. So in looking at that, there are a number of factors. So we believe there's no central record, we don't charge, there's no kind of central point of access, but we believe between 6,000, that's 20 people per day visit the farm. So it's broadly primary school age children with carers and preschool children, obviously, with carers. There is some limited provision, or there was some limited provision around kind of equine assisted, so horse assisted learning for service users in social services. So there was a small amount of that, and we'll have to replace that. There is a small amount of kind of care farming and volunteer placements. So we'd have to divert those people across to other similar kind of opportunities. And there was a weekly children's pony club There is a Docklands Pony Club, so our ponies at the moment, for the time being, are there so that they're getting the proper care that they need. There are quite a few local farms, so Mudshoot Farm is very close, Tower Hamlets. There's also Hackney City Farm, and in Essex there's Old McDonald's Farm and Marsh Farm, so there is farm provision very close. In terms of the numbers, that's what we're looking at. The second part was around the farm buildings, I think, was the second question.
And the integration into the, sorry, Bo, the second part was about the integration into the master plan. Am I correct, Councillor?
Yeah, and the farm buildings. So there's no, I've kind of presented the presentation around the space. The farm buildings aren't really a going concern long term. Those of you who know Beckton know there's a lot of subsidence. So there's significant subsidence to the buildings themselves. What we're saying is that the farm site and the Beckton master plan wouldn't be developed on for anything other than kind of sports, recreation and park usage. There are loads of opportunities we could look at. It needs to be representative of community need. So what we need to do is do a really large scale engagement exercise, and we talk to residents locally in the borough about what they'd like to see in that space. So it could be they want to see, I don't know, maybe food growing. It could be that they do want an ongoing animal offer. It could be that sports facilities, play facilities, active travel or general wellbeing. So there's lots of opportunities there. The farm buildings themselves, which are referred to in the question, aren't fit for long-term use, and whatever happens will need to be replaced due to subsidence. I hope that's covered for the questions.
Thank you, Bo. And on Councillor McQuarna's question about visitor feedback and impact on visitors.
Okay, so I think, Louise, did you have some, I mean, you've been through some of the visitor books and some of the feedback that we've got. So did you have that? Can you just give us a bit of an outline around that?
Thank you. Yes. So in terms of feedback, what I would say is, our farm sort of offer was, very informal in terms of, the gates being opened, people sort of walking into the site. But ultimately, our farm staff's main focus was actually around the sort of the care of the animals. So we actually sort of, the farm workers themselves were not engagement officers, actively, seeking out and having conversations with sort of farm users. Whilst we have had some specific activities, particularly at sort of weekends, the main focus of, the farm workers has been around the animal care. In terms of feedback, there has been some mixed feedback. We obviously have had placements, as we've touched on, volunteering opportunities, sort of long-term care farming placements. So we have had, a number of service users that have visited the farm for very long periods of time. That's obviously, an important offer to them. We've had other feedback from visitors around disappointing experiences at the farm. Some of those things I've touched on around not having staff to engage with, on-site messaging not being particularly good, around just actually sort of explaining around, some of the purposes of the farm, some of the whole story around breeding of animals. A lot of people weren't sort of aware of the breeding programs that were going on at the farm, and also observations just around the sort of the poor housekeeping and dilapidated conditions at time. So some mixed feedback, I would say there.
Thank you, Louise.
Chair, can I just come in quickly on one of the questions from Councillor Shah, just on the Beckton master plan, because I think that's quite important in terms of the looking forward. I think, you've heard about the kind of the state of the dilapidation of the buildings and the subsidence, and which is a problem in the area. As I said in my introduction, we do get a lot of interest from that area, and my fellow Beckton, being a Beckton councillor, I'm aware of this personally, but I think you'll find out my fellow Beckton councillors and the Custom House councillors about interest in green space, and that the community assembly is particularly dominated. I think there is, effectively we have a bit of a blank piece of paper. There's some stuff that in the kind of formal parks, Beston District Park North with the lake and the boathouse and things, but the sports pitches, but there is a lot of scope for doing a whole range of things that perhaps we don't cover in the borough already, looking at different types of families, send provision. There is some facilities in King George V Park which could be adapted to things like skateboard parks or that kind of thing, which we just don't cover. So there is a huge range of scope, and as Bo has said, there is an opportunity in that for a continued animal offer, but something that perhaps is more manageable and is more interactive and more designed for the 21st century and perhaps some of the needs of local families and local communities. But certainly what we would want to do is a very wide-scale conversation with the public and bring in all those ideas, because one thing we've certainly found in community assemblies is there's an awful lot of interest and idea out there, and I think we would want to capture that.
Thank you, Councillor Assa. Councillor Shah, do you feel as though their questions were answered?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Wonderful. Councillor Makwana, are you happy with the answers?
Chair, thank you.
Wonderful. I'm going to go to Councillor Singh Verdi and then Councillor Wilson. Okay. Councillor Singh Verdi, your question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In the presentation, the short presentation we had, one of the things that was mentioned is the sustainability. And looking at the long-term sustainability, the question about the funding, we're looking at a shortfall of approximately £500,000. Do we have a budget for that? Sustainability, and also the fact that what would happen with the animal welfare or the animals that are currently on site, because one of the last things we want to see is no longer we have the animals there and be in a position where people will be saying to us, what have you done with them? Because we should be able to answer that fundamentally and be open with where we're going to go with that. Because in this day and age, we have to be mindful with everything that's going on. And coming through a pandemic, it could be seen as that it's a location where people want to see, especially the youngsters these days of nursery age, where they haven't had the opportunity to see some of the farm animals. But we want to be able to have the opportunity to give the realistic view of where we stand, in the sense that we have taken all these things on board rather than just saying, well, we've only got the one option and that's the end of it. So we will make sure we have explored everything we can and be realistic with the decision we're going to make.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. Some very prescient questions. Can I suggest, Bo, if you're taking the first part of the question on sustainability and budget, that you feel free to do so with the slides to hand, and then we'll go to Tina on the animal welfare side.
Sorry, I'm on mute at the moment. So yes, so broadly, it's not a sustainable financial position. So there is no budget at present to run the farm. The farm's previous budget was 332. Following inspection and the requirement to put in additional kind of improvements and staffing, we believe it will cost £440,000 a year to run. Well, 438, but £440,000. That is a pressure on the public rail budget. And that is a pressure that's currently unfunded. So it's not a sustainable financial position. So hopefully I've asked that. On the basis that 6,000 people or so go to the farm each year, the cost per person is significant. You're kind of looking at around £70 per person that the council spends on each person who attends the farm. And I think it is really important to think about where can young people see animals. I think it was important that Louise said earlier that there was no interaction with the public. So if we want to provide an offer, it should be an offer that's educational and explains kind of the animals, the habitats, kind of how they live. And at the moment, we're not providing that. There are some local farms. I think I went through them before. Hackney has a city farm, and also Mudshoot does. But with respect to the financial position, it's not a sustainable position for the council to maintain.
Thank you, Bo. Councillor Singh Verdi, on the topic of sustainability and budget, does that answer your first part of the question? Wonderful. Can we go to either Louise or Tina, I assume Tina, on the animal welfare side, please? And Sheila as well.
Yeah. So, sorry, could I I mean, if you need more detail, then obviously Tina will speak. But with regard to the animals, animals will only be destroyed if they absolutely have to, if it's because of the condition of the animal. Already some animals have been rehomed, and the other animals will be rehomed should the decision be that the city farm is no longer a place where they will be kept. So they will be. We're mindful of animal welfare issues, and we've got a responsibility as a local authority and as an animal welfare service as well to ensure that the animals are treated as they should be, and that they are rehomed whenever possible. So if you want more detail, as I said, some of them have already been rehomed, and I think that Bo mentioned that about the ponies that have gone elsewhere. So if there was about 90 animals, I think, that remain at the farm, so there aren't any that will not be treated as we would with any other animal that we come across during the course of our work. But if you want more detail, then Tina's here to answer.
Could I just chip in at that point, Chair?
Yes, of course.
I think it's important to reassure people, and I think Councillor Zinverdi has made a very important point that animal welfare remains very much the top of our priority here. We've ensured there have been proper veterinary checks as part of this process, which is why it has taken some time. We wanted to make sure we've got all the facts very carefully and looked at all the options before we went to a decision, which is also another reason we wanted it to come through scrutiny, so it was properly looked at. So veterinary care has been absolutely paramount, and as part of the inspection during lockdown, that was what kind of prioritised a bit our process. It's worth saying about those animals being rehoused, and Louise has kind of hinted at it about the engagement. A city farm, and I think it touches on what Councillor Zinverdi has asked in regards, educational issues and allowing children to get access to animals, is you would want in this day and age them to be able to interact with animals, learn about them, engage with them. Effectively, what we have at the farm at the moment is more like an old-fashioned zoo where people can go and look at them rather than interact. That is not in kind of modern practices how you would use that. Therefore, some of the animals were certainly not friendly enough in terms of being able to be engaged with children. So we've rehomed those to places where they can kind of work with them to ensure that they are well homed. So I think to reassure everyone, animal welfare is top of this. And I think we have to say, the Animal Welfare Service spends a lot of time ensuring the public can meet the proper standards, and we have to meet those too, which is exactly what we're doing. So that's part of that, and I think that needs to be a reassurance to everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Assa. Tina, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, I don't. No, only that all the animals will be rehomed, and a lot of the animals that are currently at the farm are quite elderly animals, so they would be going out to retirement places.
Thank you. Councillor Zinverdi, does that cover your question?
That does, Chair. Could I ask a supplementary question?
May I go to Councillor Wilson and Nazir first and then come back to you?
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Councillor Wilson, your question, please.
Yeah, mine is on finance, Chair. We've got the situation where, if I understood the officer right, we're spending £70 on average per person per visit to this. I cross-reference that with page 22 of our main agenda bundle, Chair, where under the strategy that was presented to both Budget Working Party and the full council, I presume, the template on page 22, says that this will be proposed within the capital programme review process for consideration. So whether it's Councillor Assa or Bo, you won't be surprised about focusing on how we're going to manage a capital programme review process at the same time as a feasibility options appraisal in terms of a Beckton master plan and a corporate plan, number one. So it's a complicated question, but how are we going to move from this position where there's no budget at all to one where we integrate it, if I'm seeing it right, in the Beckton master plan, but the capital implications as well?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Who's taking the question on budget?
I'm happy to take the question. I just need to think about what the question was. I think the question was that there is a significant revenue pressure. How will we redevelop and provide a new offer in Beckton and address the pressure? If that was my understanding. If we were to take the recommended option and to close the farm, it would take 6 months, but that revenue pressure would cease completely. There'd be a small amount around security, repairs and maintenance. But broadly, the bulk of the pressure would go, the £400,000. If we put in place a capital programme for a new Beckton Park master plan, we'd be looking at a sustainable offer. So there might be a much smaller animal offer, but it wouldn't be with the same kind of staffing, building, maintenance, repairs, and those kind of costs associated. And where possible, we want to move to more kind of community-driven approach. So we've got a community market garden, which is kind of near the farm. So expansion of that, things like food growing, biodiversity sites for kind of wildlife, and that they cost far less than the current farm provision costs. So by taking the recommended option, we'd address the budget pressure broadly, and would have to look at sustainable options for a future Beckton master plan, which would be significantly less expensive on this case. In terms of capital, we'd go through SIB, which is the Council Strategic Investment Board. We'd go for a process of a master planning. So it'd be consultation, design, and again, consultation on those designs. Then we'd obviously look to utilise any monies the council's got around kind of retained Section 106 or the capital programme for the authority. So I hope that kind of covers off the elements of the question. Councillor, was that okay?
Thank you both. Councillor Wilson, does that cover your question?
Now, can I come back?
You may briefly.
I get the revenue one, but that's always, in a sense, easier to answer. Mine was a more complicated one, trying to link this with the proposed option of integration within a master plan. I wanted to know what the capital allocation for that already was allocated, as it were. If it has been, because this is an additional requirement to that, and I'm speaking from some experience that capital program review may actually mean that the farm, we could be in a scenario where the farm is shut and we don't have enough replacement in order to reassure the public of what we're doing, because it will be held up in a pipeline process. I think that's directed more towards the cabinet member, chair, than the officers.
Understood, Councillor Wilson. If I may reinterpret for the cabinet member, we understand that there is a £442,000 revenue pressure, but has any budget as of yet been allocated to deal with the farm potentially closing and then being integrated with the master plan, or is that budget yet to be allocated?
That budget is yet to be allocated because obviously we've got a work in progress in terms of what we're looking at in deciding what the kind of picture for the parks looks like. So I take on board what Councillor Wilson says, but we are also very aware that there are kind of a number of moving parts with the farm going into that will need to be kept into consideration. So I think we will kind of take that under advisement in terms of needing to be kept an eye on, but this is a kind of work in progress. And that's what, in a sense, pre-decision scrutiny means that we can't give you all the answers on that at the moment, but certainly we'll make sure that you get as much information on that as we move that forward, so you're kept fully informed if that's acceptable.
Thank you, Councillor Astor. So I suppose from that we could interpret that scrutiny could play a part in recommending what that budget be for integration.
I would welcome that, and that would be helpful.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Astor. May I please bring in Councillor Nazir?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers, for the presentation, and to James. And it was really reassuring to better understand that animal welfare is a top priority, and that's incredibly heartening. And I think that always has to be the top priority. I just I had a couple of questions and reflections at the same time, if I may, Chair. So I guess my first reflection is that a quality offer is really important for Newham and Newham children, and an offer that is distinctive and distinguished from other offers that we currently have. And I can't help but feel, and I'm sure those of you with an encyclopedic knowledge of Newham will correct me, but I can't help but feel that we have a lot of community gardens and we have a lot of, things a bit like that, meadows and whatnot. But we don't have another sort of community farm. And that is quite a unique piece, that is quite a unique offering. And I kind of feel that a lot of our kids don't really get the opportunity to engage with animals and interact with animals, and that's such an important part of growing up and understanding the world, and understanding the environment within which we live, and the environmental implications, be it biodiversity or climate change, and to not have that connection on your doorstep can often mean that our kids don't get that offer or that access. Notwithstanding the fact that only 6,000 people visited and it was £70 per person, I get that equation, but there's also clearly been some issues around how effectively that entity was run, and how how perhaps it was lacking in strength of reach, or marketing wasn't clearly the priority there. So I'm not sure that's a helpful figure to understand what has been. I'm not convinced necessarily that that's a helpful figure to understand what could be. So I guess my question is around better understanding the reasons for the for deciding to close the farm. Obviously, I do understand, and Councillor Hanif has already sort of asked this question, but I guess I ask it again because I do feel quite strongly about it. It would be great. It would be great to better understand sort of the financial implications behind it, and what has been done, what outreach has been done. So what's been the process of elimination, so that we can fully understand why that recommendation is on the table, because we do expect an upturn in the economy eventually, and yes, it has been a really horrendous 2 years, but just what is the equation there, just so we can better understand, because I feel it's a big decision to make, and I'm not entirely clear that I fully understand that from the paper that's been presented, although I fully appreciate the work has probably been done. And then I guess sort of as a corollary to that, if we were looking at the recommended offer, it does sort of broadly suggest something of an animal offer, but an animal offer could be, could be a very, very minimal thing, which barely has any animals, or it could be a more substantive part of the wider offering. So I'm finding it quite difficult to conceptualize what that could look like, because if we're talking about a more substantive animal offer, then perhaps that is entirely okay and does sort of fill that gap that I feel that is necessary to be filled. But if it's a very minimal piece, then it probably doesn't. So a few reflections and a couple of questions within that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nazir. Who would like to comment on those questions?
Can I start, and then officers can pitch in, because I think a lot of that's perhaps kind of politically placed question rather than an officer-based one.
Of course.
I mean, I think Councillor Nazir's summary of kind of the animal offer part at the beginning is absolutely fair. And to give you my starting point on this, when it came within my portfolio, I visited it as kind of having a look and went down there not as hello, I'm the person responsible, but just as a visitor, and looked around and was depressed by what we were offering. I went down one Sunday, looked around, and thought, this is not, this is not offering anything, and it just doesn't feel like it's been well looked after or well maintained for a long time. And that was the kind of process of getting the ball running of how can we get the money into this that actually revitalizes it. As we've then done investigations and taken advantage of the kind of enforced lockdown to have a look at what might need to be done, we've uncovered a number of problems that have made that significantly more difficult. I think the argument you make around an animal offer and what that looks like is hugely important. And my aim on this always was to revitalise this and take advantage of what was potentially a good facility. I think poor management, lack of investment over a very long time has led us to the point where the amount of effort that needs to go into it effectively means you're probably going to be in a position where starting with a blank sheet of paper and asking what we do now, rather than try to patch up what is in quite a dilapidated state, makes more sense, both in terms of being able to provide a substantive offer, but also the kind of finances and the maintenance around that. If we were talking about something that was in a good state of repair, was well maintained, was engaging with residents on quite a good level, we would have been in a position where we say, well, we'll find a way of reverse the budget saving and find a way around that. But of course, what we found is the budget is far too small, levels of investment are significantly high, but actually you would need to replace all the buildings, you would need to restock all the animals, you would need to reshape your entire kind of structure of it, because it has become out of date in the way it offers. There is no interaction with children, and I think the point you make about the business model, which has led us to the point where it is, I think lots of people remember visiting it, but haven't been in a while because of that. And we certainly know anecdotally some of the schools in the area have been travelling out of London to go to these facilities rather than using on their doorstep. And when people are voting with their feet, that tells you quite a lot. I think what we've got in terms of an animal offer going forward, if that's needs to be part of consultation with the community. We need to ask them, how much do you value this and what do you want to see? And I think that should involve engagement with things like schools. We've got the Richard House Hospice next door, which doesn't seem to have a link up, and actually that could have fitted in. And actually that's part of that master plan. What does that look like? Is it something small? Does it involve something more substantial animals? And balance that out. So I think, you know, that is why the consultation and the conversation has got to be substantive, is to find out what the local community would value. And I think talking the education service involved in this and the young people's service are quite important, because I think there's not, in a sense, the difficult decision has left us with quite a good opportunity to kind of go back to that 1977 vision, as I imagine it was, and see if we can repurpose it for the 21st century. So that doesn't give you anything definite now, but I think it does create an awful lot of opportunities, and I think the kind of comments you're making will help us shape that conversation. If that answers your question.
Thank you, Councillor. It goes a long way towards answering the question. I can hear the intent, which is very reassuring. Chair, if I may, a quick supplementary.
You may, Councillor Zia.
Thank you. Just with regards to the community, when we're thinking about community, I'm assuming that we're thinking about the wider Newham community and the surrounds, because we'd be expecting to be drawing in from a wider sort of cohort rather than the immediate. It's just often when I've heard that reference that I'm never quite sure what people are saying, but I understand from you that you're thinking more widely.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of it being a local park, as part of it, there is a community element, which is the people who live in Custom House and the people who live in Beckton. But I think given the kind of nature of the facilities that are already there being used on a wider level, and potentially stuff we put in, because that's, you know, Beckton District Park North, for example, is regarded as one of our destination parks because of its lake, because of its facilities. There would need to be some kind of wider engagement, which is why I reference kind of education service and the young people's service, because potentially some of the facilities we could put in there above and beyond the farm, and potentially, you know, send provision, all that kind of thing, could affect other parts of the borough and bring people in. So I think that community is both local but wider, and I think that's kind of what you were suggesting as well.
Thank you, Councillor Assa. I'm conscious that we do have to get through the item 7 on top of this for this meeting, but I would like to, in one gulp, are you raising a point of order or another question?
No, another question.
Okay.
Or a statement.
All right. In one go, I'd like to go for Councillor Singh Verdi's former supplementary, then Councillor Shah's, then Councillor, I can't do 4 in one go. Right, we'll do Councillor Singh Verdi's, Councillor Shah's. Councillor Wilson, you've had 2 questions so far. Do you mind if I go to Councillor McManus first and then come back to you?
It was on the education one while I thought of it. It was while we're on education, the reference of my colleagues.
I promise I'll give you the chance to make that statement as long as it's brief, but I would like to go for these 3 first. Are you content with that, Councillor Wilson? I'll take that eye cut as a yes. But Councillor Singh Verdi, quickly, please.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up, really. In line with a little bit what Councillor Nazir said, when we talk about community and the offer to the community, if we was to go down the route of the recommendation, which is the key recommendation, will we be able to offer the children of the future or the school children the opportunity to be given the facility to visit, i.e. Mudchute Farm or other farms which are close by as part of their education? And will there be some kind of an offer to say, yes, we will be taking, i.e. school trips to these places, so we can ensure that the facilities there, which necessarily is not based in Newham.
Excellent question. Thank you. Councillor Shah, your question, please.
Thank you, Chair. If I may go back to the budget questions that my colleagues have asked previously. I'm going to ask this in
May I speak up, please?
Sorry. So I'm going to go back to the budget questions that all these colleagues have asked previously. I'm going to ask this question in very layman's terms. I'm not an accountant, so I just want to simplify it and ask. Just trying to find out, did the officers consider that getting some money from the reserves, and I don't know how much reserves we have, the 440,000 as a capital investment, and then looking to further funding and sponsorships, and thereafter look into way of income generating, maybe, I don't know, if we were to ask the schools, the users to pay for it. Have you considered that when you thought of closing the farm?
Thank you, Councillor Shah. I promise I am noting down your questions. Councillor Makwana, please, your question.
Thank you, Chair. What I wanted to ask is, what is the potential impact on children with SCND who may be using the facility for respite visits? Was this site used for the well in the past, and are there adequate other facilities in the borough to undertake this in future if the option to close is undertaken?
Thank you. So we've got a question first on what is the replacement offer for children? Secondly, on the budget, was it considered to use reserves as capital investment or for charging schools for the use of it? And thirdly, the impact on children with extra educational needs who are considered SEND in education system. Who would like to take the beginning of those questions? Bearing in mind, we are pushed for time. Bo, I see your hand.
I think the first question around education is a good question. I wouldn't want to presume what my colleagues in education or in schools would kind of put in place around the curriculum or where they choose to provide that education and whether in that format. So I couldn't answer that now, Chair. So that's the honest answer.
Could I just pitch in briefly on the education thing, because I think Councillor Sinverdi makes an interesting point about potential partnerships which we can explore. And just to give you an example of one we know already is working, obviously West Ham Park is within the borough but is not owned or run by the council, it's run by the Corporation of London. They already do a number of school projects, and I know schools from across the borough go and visit that and engage with that around planting and stuff, and that could set a template for other things on the lines of that he has outlined. So I think there are potential for that, and that's something we can engage with our education colleagues and schools and I think actually also seeing what schools are already using, because as we found out they are travelling to go and visit other facilities and get an idea of that creates some potential partnerships.
Thank you, Councillor Rasser. And while you're on the topic, Councillor Makwana's question about the impact on children who are SEND, would you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
I think we'd need to have an understanding of whether that was being used, and Louise may be in a better position in terms of understanding of what use has been going on at the moment, but certainly the understanding I have is that the nature of the layout of the farm, the way it was being used, there was not much interaction in a way that you would have seen in other city farms that would have supported that. Louise will correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Thank you, Councillor Rasser. Yeah, just to follow up on that, in terms of SEND, so we've had a number of volunteers that I've touched on, a number of placements. They've actually been with adults with sort of learning disabilities, which have sort of been quite long-term placements. In terms of sort of younger people, we have had some placements, particularly around sort of the horses, with the stock of horses and small ponies that the farm had. Interestingly, as we've sort of been working with Docklands riding establishment sort of over the last few months, and we've been really grateful for their support in actually taking some of those horses and ponies from our care. They have an excellent offer for sort of riding for disabled children and adults. So I think, as I say, I'm not an expert on the area, but I do think there is already some good provision around that. But I'll be honest, I can't comment further than that. Obviously, the farm has been closed since March 2020. I joined the authority just a couple of months sort of prior to that. But as I say, obviously, it's also sort of important to reflect that the farm's obviously been open since 1977, with the sort of the different management arrangements, particularly over the last decade. There obviously has been a lot of initiatives and different areas pursued. Certainly, the most recent initiative pursued was the development of the SAND school and the equine assisted learning.
Thank you, Louise. And thirdly, on Councillor Shah's question regarding the use of reserves or the farm becoming a place where it could generate income, who can answer that for us?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of answer that. So the council has an obligation to set a balanced budget. So we obviously couldn't intentionally use reserves to support a revenue position in the same way we couldn't capitalise our revenue spend. We can't do that. The kind of our accounting regulations don't allow us to do that. In terms of offering it as a kind of attraction, a paid attraction, I'll be honest, the site as it is needs significant capital investment before we'd open it to the public, and also the animal welfare requirements, the refurbishment required means it wouldn't be an attractive offer to visitors. I know we've said that based on the current visit numbers, it'd be a very expensive visit. That would obviously reduce with the numbers of people, but I'm not sure with the current condition of the asset of the facility that would be a viable opportunity, at least without significant redevelopment and kind of a number of years passing.
Thank you, Bo. Are members happy for us to move on to the next item as it is? Councillor Wilson, I'm aware that you had a comment you wanted to raise before we moved on. No, you okay?
I think, well, yeah, I will come in. I think it's on the additional needs point. Just a word of caution, really. There's been quite a lot of talk about the use of school budgets. From a parochial example I have, we were trying to get one of the schools, which will be unnamed, but I think the issue has been prolonged in education, where we wanted some funding from their budgets. You can look at the underspends in school budgets, which are in the budget book, but particularly individual schools sometimes are very tight in their budgets, and it looks as if there's going to be more problems in the future. So it was just a bit of word of warning around there. We were trying to get a school to be involved in a particular sort of pocket park, and for the hearing impaired and the visually impaired, and just a small contribution. So I just put that up as a little flagged up one up. But while I'm on additional needs, the additional needs students come from 0 to 25. We do have one of the biggest FE colleges in my ward, and I think we do tend to overemphasise schools at the expense of others, because those issues pertaining to the use of the park or what we might do in terms of environmental studies or whatever else we might use in a sort of more integrated fashion, and I hope we can do, that we involve all of our education partners. So just flagging that up, really. One of the health warning about school budgets, which are often going to be tight, looks like they're going to be tighter, and that's notwithstanding what James has already said, that some schools are doing really good work with other partners, like in West Ham.
Thank you. It's a really helpful contribution, Councillor Wilson, and I'm sure that officers and Councillor Astor will consider that at the highest priority when they look and see our recommendations following this meeting. In the interest of time, I do want to ensure that we have sufficient time for item 7. So I'm going to move on to item 5, which is the forward work programme. We're looking at the actions tracker in the pack. At this time, there is no forward work programme because we'll be formulating it following this meeting in a private session, during which we will be able to cover questions and comments on the actions tracker. It is appended for info. Can we take the actions tracker as written and read from members present? Yes? Fantastic. In which case, we can move on to item 6, which is exclusion of the press and public. Now, as part of the Newham City Forum update, there was one exempt appendix. If members have any questions on this, we will be required to move into private session. I imagine members do have requisite questions on the exempt item, but I will need them to formally affirm this so that we can move into private session. Do members have any specific questions they wish to ask relating to the private appendix only? Please raise your hands if so. I will need to see hands if people have questions relating to the private appendix. I see 3. Sorry, Richard. What are you looking? Oh, but they can't both, can they?
No, technically, no.
Okay, in which case we will take the, in which case we must resolve to exclude the press and public from the meeting for the following items of business, to the extent that exempt information as described in part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act of 1972 is likely to be disclosed. Are members in agreement? Excellent, thank you very much. Officers, please ensure that the meeting is now in private session before we proceed.
Sorry, also just as a just as a housekeeping point, we may as well move to the date of the next meeting as well, because otherwise we need to open the meeting up again. So I may as well do the date of the next meeting, and then we can.
So we should do that before we close.
Yeah.
Okay. In which case we're going to jump ahead So item 8, very quickly, the date of the next meeting. The next meeting of the Regeneration Housing Environment Commission will be held on the 14th of October 2021 for members of the public and press in attendance. That is therefore covered. And we can now go back and move to a closed session. Thank you to members of the public and press for attending thus far.